If you enjoy these deep dives into historical narratives, please consider following the channel for more content like this. The autumn of 1956 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, was less a season than a state of mind. The air, thick with the scent of decaying leaves and chimney smoke, seemed to carry a weight that settled over the ivy-covered brickwork of Harvard Yard. It was a weight of unspoken anxieties, of allegiances scrutinized, and of a pervasive, low-frequency tremor of suspicion that characterized the era. This was the world of Dr. Arthur Vance, a man who, until that autumn, had believed himself entirely insulated by the tenure of his intellect. Dr. Vance was a professor of Slavic languages and literature. He was 48 years old, slightly stooped, with wire-rimmed glasses that perpetually slid down a nose clearly intended for scholarship rather than conflict. His life was one of ordered repetition. Lectures on Turgenev's structural nuances, faculty meetings spent debating the merits of obscure linguistic theories, and evenings in his study, the smell of pipe tobacco and old paper his only companions. His wife, Eleanor, understood his need for academic solitude. Their home on a quiet, tree-lined street was a sanctuary of high-minded discussion and classical music. Vance was not a political man. He viewed the ideological struggles of the day, the stark binary of Washington versus Moscow, as a vulgar simplification of human existence. His passion was for the soul of Russia, the internal landscapes of Dostoevsky's characters, the lyrical precision of Pushkin. He saw the Soviet Union not as an existential threat, but as a tragic custodian of a culture he revered. He held a mild, academic disdain for the bureaucratic machinery of both sides, the FBI's clumsy domestic surveillance, and the rigid cultural censorship of the Soviet Ministry of Culture. His lectures were popular among the serious students. He spoke with a dry, precise enthusiasm, capable of spending an entire hour dissecting a single stanza of poetry, tracing its etymological roots back to Old Church Slavonic. He was, in short, a man respected for his mind and largely ignored for his lack of political fervor. He had a past, as did most intellectuals of his generation. In 1938, as a graduate student, he had attended 3 meetings of a socialist discussion group, driven more by intellectual curiosity and a desire to impress a young woman than by any real revolutionary zeal. He had subscribed to the new masses for 6 months. These were facts he had long forgotten, filed away in the dusty attic of his youth. The university itself was navigating a difficult path. The alarms of the McCarthy era had faded, but the resulting institutional paranoia was now entrenched. Loyalty oaths were a recent, unlamented memory, but the relationship between the university administration and the Federal Bureau of Investigation was one of careful, quiet cooperation. The administration understood that its federal grants and its reputation depended on maintaining an environment free of subversive elements. A professor's background was vetted, his associations noted. Arthur Vance, with his specialization, was inherently a person of interest, though his apolitical nature had thus far kept him categorized as harmless. It was this perception of harmlessness that made him the ideal candidate. In the calculated arithmetic of counterintelligence, an individual's value was often inversely proportional to their awareness of the game. Dr. Vance, buried in 19th century manuscripts, was blissfully unaware that the machinery of the Cold War was about to grind its gears and find him squarely in its path. His daily walk across the yard, past the statues and the students, was the walk of a man who believed in the sanctity of his insulated world. That belief was the first vulnerability the Bureau would identify. The first deviation from the norm was subtle, easily dismissed. It was a persistent, faint click on his home telephone line. Eleanor mentioned it first. "The line is dreadful this week, Arthur," she'd said. "It sounds as if someone is listening in." Vance had waved it off as atmospheric interference, the consequence of old wiring in an old house. But the click remained, a tiny metallic punctuation mark at the start of every call. Then came the repairman. He arrived on a Tuesday when Vance was home, claiming a report of static on the line. He was a broad-shouldered man in plain blue overalls, carrying a heavy metal toolbox. He didn't look like the usual telephone technicians. His hands were clean, his fingernails neatly filed. He spent 20 minutes in the basement, near the junction box, and another 10 testing the receiver in Vance's study. Vance, preoccupied with grading midterm papers, paid him little mind, only noting the man's efficient, almost military, tidiness. When the man left, the clicking on the line was gone. The silence now seemed more ominous than the noise. The definitive catalyst arrived in the form of an academic invitation. The World Affairs Council, in conjunction with the university, was hosting a reception for a visiting Soviet cultural delegation. It was a minor event, meant to foster understanding in a carefully controlled environment. Vance, as the head of the Slavic department, was obligated to attend. He went with reluctance, anticipating bland appetizers and stilted conversations. The reception was held in a university hall, adorned with portraits of long-dead deans. The Americans clustered on one side, the Soviets on the other, a small no-man's land of polite neutrality between them. Vance was nursing a glass of sherry when a man detached himself from the Soviet group and approached him, hand extended. "Dr. Arthur Vance, a genuine pleasure. I am Victor Orlov." Orlov was perhaps 40, with a disarmingly warm smile and eyes that seemed to take in the entire room without effort. He spoke excellent, lightly accented English. He was, his credentials stated, a cultural attaché from the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. "I have read your monograph on Turgenev's use of the superfluous man," Orlov said, his enthusiasm seeming genuine. "It is required reading at the Moscow State University, you know. You truly grasp the doctor spirit." Vance was, despite himself, flattered. It was rare to find a bureaucrat, especially a Soviet one, who had actually read his work. They spoke for nearly 30 minutes. Orlov was charming, witty, and self-deprecating. He lamented the current political tensions that made cultural exchange so difficult. He spoke of new translations of American authors in Moscow, of a shared humanity that transcended politics. Perhaps, Orlov suggested as the reception waned, we could continue this discussion. "I am in Boston for the week. A simple lunch. To discuss literature, nothing more." Vance, guided by academic courtesy, agreed. It seemed harmless, a professional courtesy. 2 days later, Vance received a different sort of visitor. A man from the University Security Liaison Office, polite euphemism for the campus contact for federal agencies. The man, a humorless administrator named Peters, asked Vance if he had attended the reception. Vance confirmed he had. "Did you have contact with any of the Soviet delegation?" Peters asked, his gaze fixed on a file on his desk. "Yes," Vance said. "I spoke with a Mr. Orlov, a cultural attaché. We discussed literature." "Mr. Orlov," Peters repeated, making a note. "Did he suggest any further contact?" Vance hesitated. The question felt invasive. He suggested lunch to continue our discussion. "I see." Peters closed the file. "Dr. Vance, as a matter of standard procedure, we advise faculty to be cautious. These cultural meetings are often multi-purpose. If you do meet him, we would appreciate a summary of your conversation." For the university's records, of course, Vance left the office feeling a chill. The request, phrased as advice, had felt like an instruction. His conversation about Turgenev, it seemed, was now a matter for the university's records. The insulated wall of his academic life had just developed its first hairline crack. A week passed. The lunch with Victor Orlov was pleasant. They met at a quiet Italian restaurant in the North End. They spoke of Chekhov's plays, of the challenges of translation, and of the harsh New England winter. Orlov was complimentary, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in Vance's academic opinions. He lamented the state of Soviet historical preservation, hinting that his own work was often stymied by men who prefer concrete to cathedrals. He made no political overtures. He did not ask for secrets. He asked for Vance's opinion on a new translation of Eugene Onegin. At the end of the meal, he paid the bill in cash and suggested they correspond. Vance filed his summary with Peter's office, detailing the literary nature of the conversation. He felt foolish doing it, as if reporting a mundane faculty meeting. He tried to put the matter out of his mind. He failed. 3 days later, 2 men were waiting for him as he left his last lecture. They were not students. They wore dark, identical suits that seemed too heavy for the mild afternoon. They stood with a stillness that was unnatural in the bustling corridor. "Dr. Arthur Vance?" the taller one asked. It was not a question. "Yes, Agent Reynolds, Federal Bureau of Investigation." "This is Agent Thompson. We'd like to ask you a few questions." "In your office, if you please." The casual "if you please" was pure formality. Vance felt a sudden, cold vacuum in his stomach. He led them to his office, the narrow room lined with books feeling suddenly like a trap. The agents did not sit until Vance was behind his desk. They sat opposite him, their postures identical. Agent Reynolds was the senior man. His face was pale and impassive, his eyes a flat grey. He placed a thin briefcase on his lap but did not open it. "Dr. Vance," Reynolds began. his voice a calm monotone. "You are the head of the Slavic languages department here." "I am. You recently attended a reception for a Soviet cultural delegation." "Yes, I did." "I filed a report on my contact with a Mr. Olaf with university security." Vance hoped this compliance would expedite their departure. Reynolds permitted himself a fractional smile. "Yes, we've seen Mr. Peter's note. Very thorough." To Genif, Reynolds paused, letting the silence stretch. "We'd like to talk about Victor Olaf. You had lunch with him. Tuesday, Paolo's. From 12:15 to 1:38 p.m. he paid. Cash." Vance felt the blood drain from his face. They hadn't just been advised to watch him. They had watched him. "We are not a cultural organization, Doctor," Reynolds continued, his voice devoid of inflection. "Victor Olaf is not a cultural attach. His file indicates he is a cadre officer with the first chief directorate of the KGB. His specialty is the recruitment of technical and academic assets." "Vance, that's absurd." "We talked about literature." "Of course you did." Agent Thompson, the silent partner, chimed in. His voice was rougher. "That's the cultivation phase. It always starts with literature or music. It's the hook." Reynolds held up a hand, silencing Thompson. He leaned forward slightly. "Doctor Vance, we are not here to discuss your loyalty. We are here to discuss your utility." He snapped open the briefcase. He did not produce a weapon or a listening device. He produced a single manila file, perhaps an inch thick. He slid it across the desk. Vance's name was typed on the tab. Vance opened it. His hands were trembling. Inside was his life, meticulously, terrifyingly documented. It started with his graduate school transcripts. Then, the meeting minutes from the 1938 Socialist Discussion Group. The names of the other attendees were listed. A receipt for his subscription to the New Masses. A transcript of a telephone call he'd made in 1949 to a colleague in New York, in which he had referred to the House Un-American Activities Committee as a circus of fools. A summary of his lunch with Olaf, far more detailed than the one he had provided, including direct quotes he hadn't realized he'd said. This is my private," Vance stammered. "There is very little private when national security is concerned, Doctor," Reynolds said, his voice still calm. "The file indicates a man with progressive sympathies, a man who specializes in the Russian language, a man who has just been engaged by a known KGB officer. An investigation, if one were opened, would be very damaging to your tenure. The university administration would be forced to cooperate. It would be unpleasant, messy." "Vance, an investigation? For what? For talking about poetry? For being a socialist when I was 21. Reynolds, for being a target, and for failing to report the full nature of that contact immediately to a federal officer. I reported it to the university." "You reported a conversation," Reynolds corrected. "You did not report a cultivation attempt by a hostile foreign agent." Vance finally understood. This was not an inquiry. This was a discovery. They weren't discovering him. They were showing him what they had discovered. The file on his desk was not an accusation. It was a leash. "What?" Vance said, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you want from me?" Agent Reynolds permitted himself that fractional smile again. "We want you to have another lunch with Mr. Olaf." The shift in perspective was jarring. For the past 2 weeks, Dr. Arthur Vance had been the subject of surveillance. He was now, without his consent, a participant in it. The world he inhabited, previously defined by texts and theories, was now defined by operational procedures and federal observation. Agent Reynolds returned to his office 2 days later, this time alone. He carried a different briefcase. The academic environment, with its traditions of open inquiry and intellectual freedom, was, as Reynolds explained it, the softest front in the Cold War. These men, like Olaf, Reynolds explained, his tone shifting from threat to pedagogy, as if explaining a simple but vital concept to a slow student. They don't operate in a vacuum. Olaf is the known element. He has diplomatic immunity. We can't touch him. We watch him. We watch who he meets, who he talks to. But Olaf isn't the one doing the real work. He's the talent scout. He identifies potential assets, like yourself, and then passes them off to an illegal. An illegal? Vance asked, the term foreign to him. A deep cover operative. Someone without diplomatic protection. Someone living under an assumed name, with a clean identity. That is who we want. Olaf is meeting someone in the Boston area. We believe it's his case officer. Perhaps even the resident, the station chief. He's been sloppy. He's been seen with Olaf twice, but never in a setting where we can get close. They are paranoid. But Olaf likes you. Vance felt ill.
He likes my analysis of Turgenev. Exactly.
He sees you as a sympathetic, harmless intellectual.
A useful man.
You are the perfect delivery mechanism.
You are the bait. Reynolds outlined the protocol.
The FBI had already escalated their technical surveillance. Vance's home telephone was now a full-time recording device, managed from a plant in a rented room 3 blocks away. His office phone was the same. A team of 2 agents was assigned to him full-time. One, posing as a mature graduate student, would sit in on his lectures.
Another, a nondescript man, would follow him on his walk home.
You won't see them, but they are there, Reynolds assured him.
Your only job is to be yourself, but being himself was now an impossibility.
When Vance called his wife to say he'd be late, he was acutely aware of the listeners. When he lectured on fathers and sons, he found himself scanning the faces in the lecture hall, wondering which one was his shadow. His world, once vast with ideas, had shrunk to the terrifying, claustrophobic parameters of the operation. Reynolds' instructions were specific. Vance was to telephone Victor Olaf at the Soviet Embassy in Washington, using a specific, non-attributable payphone in Harvard Square. The call itself would be a risk, but Reynolds explained that Olaf would be expecting Vance to show counter-surveillance awareness, and using his office phone would seem clumsy. Tell him you enjoyed the conversation, Reynolds instructed, feeding him the lines. Tell him you've been thinking about his comments on modern translations.
Suggest you meet again. Be casual. He will accept. Vance made the call.
His hand, holding the heavy black receiver, was slick with perspiration. Olaf sounded delighted.
Arthur.
How wonderful to hear from you.
Yes. I am in New York, but I can be in Boston by the weekend. Shall we say Saturday? The public library. The courtyard.
It is quiet there. When Vance reported this to Reynolds, the agent nodded, satisfied.
The public library. Good.
Open, but compartmentalized.
They love it. The surveillance intensified. The day before the meeting, 2 agents, posing as historians, spent hours in the library courtyard, mapping sightlines, identifying entry and exit points, and planting a small, low-power transmitter under a stone bench.
Vance's home was visited again, this time by Agent Thompson, who brought a suit jacket from the cleaners.
A gift, Thompson said gruffly. Sewn into the lining of the collar was a wire, a bulky, uncomfortable, and primitive body transmitter. The battery life is 2 hours.
Turn it on right before you enter the courtyard.
The switch is here, in the cuff. Just
fix your cufflink. Vance, this is...
I am a professor. I am not. This, Thompson. You are now DOC. You do this, you do it right, and you go back to your books. You mess this up, and that file Agent Reynolds has gets a lot thicker.
And we won't be around to protect you when Mr. Olaf's friends figure out what's going on. The threat was clear.
The surveillance wasn't just on the Soviets. It was on him.
He was a man caught between 2 vast, impersonal machines, and the only way out was through. He spent Friday night in his study, the white suit jacket hanging in his closet like an indictment. He tried to read, but the words of Dostoevsky, a man who understood prisons, now seemed to mock him from the page.
This was not a confrontation of shouting or violence, but a confrontation of ideologies, waged in the quiet, wood-paneled confines of Dr. Vance's own mind, with Agent Reynolds serving as the prosecutor. The moment of turning did not happen with a threat, but with a request that sounded almost reasonable. The day of the meet, Reynolds met Vance not in his office, but at a nondescript sedan parked 2 streets away from the library.
The mood was tense.
Reynolds' professional calm was absolute, which only heightened Vance's anxiety. He will not ask you for anything today, Doctor, Reynolds said, his eyes scanning the street. This is still cultivation.
You are not to offer anything. You will just be yourself.
Talk about books. But
at some point, you will mention a colleague.
Reynolds handed Vance a small 3x5 index card.
On it was a name. Dr. Robert Ellison, MIT.
Physics department.
I don't know any Robert Ellison, Vance said, his voice strained.
You do now.
He's a friend. You see him at faculty mixers.
You will mention, in passing, that Dr. Ellison is unhappy.
That he feels his work on naval propulsion systems is not appreciated by the Department of Defense. You will say he's become cynical, perhaps drinks a bit too much.
You will say he finds the bureaucracy suffocating. Vance stared at the card. This was the line.
Before, he was a passive participant. Now, they were asking him to lie, to invent a vulnerable American scientist.
You are manufacturing bait, Vance said, the words tasting sour. We are, Reynolds agreed without apology. Dr. Ellison does not exist. The project does not exist.
It is a ghost.
a piece of disinformation designed to see if Olaf, or whoever he reports to, bites. If they take the bait, it will redirect their assets from trying to penetrate real, secure projects to chasing a phantom. It protects actual assets. It is a standard counterintelligence procedure. And what if I refuse?
Reynolds turned his head slowly to look at Vance.
His grey eyes were flat, devoid of malice, but filled with an unshakable certainty.
Refusal is not an option, Doctor. You are already in this.
You are a cooperating, unregistered asset of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. If you refuse, the cooperation ends. The file we have on you, the socialist meetings, the circus of fool's comment, the unreported contact with a known KGB officer is activated. You will be placed under formal investigation for violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Your tenure will be suspended.
Your security clearance for visiting scholars revoked. Your name will be leaked to the press as a person of interest in a Soviet espionage case.
Your wife will be ostracized. Your colleagues will shun you.
Victor Orlov's associates, meanwhile, will read that same newspaper report and wonder why you were talking to the FBI.
They will assume you are a double agent.
They will not be as
procedural as we are. He paused. We, on the other hand, are offering you a way to serve your country.
A way to neutralize a threat. All you have to do is have a conversation about literature and mention your friend Ellison.
Then, this is over. We protect your name. The file is sealed.
You go back to your books. It was a perfect trap. To refuse was to destroy his life and reputation through official channels. To comply was to destroy his own sense of self.
He was being asked to betray the very principles of open, honest intellectualism that defined him, using the tools of that world, a casual conversation, a shared confidence as weapons.
Orlov.
He seemed like a decent man, Vance whispered. A last weak defense. He is a decent operative, Reynolds corrected.
He is loyal to his flag.
I am asking you to be loyal to yours. Are you, Dr. Vance? The question hung in the stale air of the sedan. It was the ultimate confrontation, not with the KGB, but with the expectations of his own government. The pressure was absolute. Yes, Arthur Vance said, his voice hollow. I am. He got out of the car, fixed the cufflink on his wired jacket, and walked toward the Boston Public Library. A man transformed. He was no longer a professor. He was an instrument. The courtyard of the Boston Public Library was an oasis of Italianate calm in the middle of the city. The sound of the fountain masked the distant traffic.
Vance sat on a stone bench, not the one Reynolds had specified, but one near it, as a man naturally would.
He opened a book of poetry, his hands shaking so badly he could not read the words.
He felt the weight of the transmitter under his jacket, a metallic parasite against his skin. Victor Orlov arrived 5 minutes late, smiling, carrying a leather briefcase.
Arthur, my apologies. The traffic from New York was terrible.
He sat, radiating warmth.
It is good to see you away from the sherry and the grey suits. The surveillance team was invisible.
Vance knew they were there in the windows of the library overlooking the courtyard, posing as tourists, as students, but he saw no one.
It was just him and Orlov. They spoke as planned. For 20 minutes, they debated the symbolic meaning of the cherry orchard in Chekhov's play.
Vance found himself disturbingly relaxing.
Orlov was an excellent conversationalist. The discussion felt real, academic.
Then, Vance saw his opening. Orlov was lamenting the small minds in bureaucracy who failed to see the big picture. It's the same here, Vance said, forcing a casual, wary tone.
I have a friend, Robert Ellison, over at MIT.
A brilliant physicist. He's working on, naval propulsion, I believe. He's become so cynical.
He feels the Dodd is simply wasting his genius, burying his work in committee. Orlov's posture did not change.
His smile remained, but his eyes, for just a fraction of a second, sharpened.
Ah, the burden of genius, Orlov said, nodding sympathetically.
It is often the case. These practical men, they do not understand the visionaries.
This,
Ellison.
He must be very frustrated. He is, Vance said, feeling a wave of self-loathing.
He said the other day he feels like his work belongs to the world, not to a government file cabinet. He drinks too much, I'm afraid. A tragedy, Orlov said, his tone still light. Perhaps he simply needs
a different audience.
One that would appreciate his vision. Orlov looked at his watch.
My goodness, look at the time. I must catch my train.
Arthur, this has been, as always, illuminating.
Perhaps
your friend Dr. Ellison would like to join us for a discussion one day. 3 minds are better than 2, yes? Perhaps, Vance said.
I will be in touch. Orlov stood, shook Vance's hand firmly, and walked away.
Vance sat for another 10 minutes, as instructed.
The book of poetry in his lap was unopened.
He felt contaminated.
The debrief with Reynolds was clinical. He took the bait, Reynolds said, listening to the recording from the wire. A different audience? Perfect. The next phase was set. A week later, Orloff called Vance on his clean home phone, which Vance now knew was the most monitored of all.
Orloff proposed dinner. And please, do bring your friend Dr. Ellison.
I have a colleague, a technical analyst, who would be so fascinated to hear his perspective. The night of the operation was cold and drizzly. The location was a restaurant in Cambridge, a quiet place known for its faculty clientele. This time, Vance was not wired. The Dr. Ellison of the operation was Agent Thompson, now transformed. Gone was the thuggish agent. In his place was a nervous, tweed-wearing academic, complete with horn-rimmed glasses and a mostly empty flask.
Vance's role was simple: make the introduction and leave.
The restaurant was crawling with FBI. The maitre d', the busboy, the couple in the corner booth, all agents. Vance and Ellison arrived. Orloff was waiting, and he was not alone.
With him was a man introduced only as Michael. Michael was the opposite of Orloff.
He was silent, pale, and watchful. His suit was ill-fitting.
He did not look like a technical analyst.
He looked like a functionary.
This, Vance realized, was their illegal, the target. Dr. Vance, a pleasure. Orloff beamed.
And this must be Dr. Ellison. Our author has spoken.
Highly of you. Thompson, as Ellison stammered, playing the part of the nervous, disgruntled scientist perfectly.
Michael is very interested in hydrodynamics, Orloff said.
Vance, as planned, excused himself.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, but my wife is expecting me.
I just wanted to make the introduction.
Robert, I'll see you at the faculty club. Vance walked out of the restaurant, his heart hammering.
He did not look back. He walked 2 full blocks in the rain, turned the corner, and was immediately pulled into a dark sedan by Agent Reynolds.
Sit. Wait, Reynolds commanded.
They sat in silence, the only sound the click of the windshield wipers. 20 minutes later, the radio in the car crackled to life. Package is secure.
We have the package. Reynolds allowed himself a small sigh of relief.
Thompson dropped a document on the table.
A fabrication.
Michael took it.
The moment he put it in his briefcase, we moved.
Orloff is screaming about diplomatic immunity. We'll have him declared persona non grata by midnight.
Michael does not have immunity. The exposure was complete. The trap baited by Vance had sprung. It's over, Doctor, Reynolds said. You did well. Vance said nothing. He stared out at the rain-slicked street.
Over felt like the wrong word.
It felt, instead, like the beginning of something else entirely. Dr. Vance's service was not, as Reynolds had promised. Over, the system, having used him, now required his final, procedural validation. The man Michael, whose full name was later identified as Mikhail Ivanovich Lermontov, a colonel in the GRU Soviet military intelligence, not the KGB, was in federal custody.
Unlike Orloff, who was on a plane to Moscow within 48 hours, Lermontov was facing charges that carried a penalty of decades in prison.
The trial itself was bifurcated. There was the public portion, a swift proceeding where the evidence the document Agent Thompson had passed, Lermontov's possession of a shortwave radio, and codebooks found in his apartment was presented. The narrative was simple. A brilliant FBI sting had caught a master spy. But the crucial evidence, the probable cause that led to the sting, was classified. This was where Vance was needed. He was not called to a public courtroom.
He was escorted by Agent Reynolds through a secure hearing room at the federal courthouse.
There was no jury, no press. There was only the judge, a government prosecutor. Lermontov's court-appointed attorney who looked exhausted and resigned, and Lermontov himself.
Vance had not seen Lermontov since the restaurant.
The illegal looked smaller, paler, and utterly defeated.
He stared at Vance with a look not of anger, but of simple, tired recognition. He was the professional who had been outmaneuvered.
Vance was required to testify in camera on the record, but sealed from the public. Dr. Vance, the prosecutor began. Please recount the nature of your first meeting with a known Soviet agent. Victor Orloff, Vance, under oath, recounted the academic reception. And your subsequent meetings, the lunch, the meeting in the library courtyard. We discussed literature. Did you, at any point, discuss matters of national security?
No, not.
Not directly, did you, at the direction of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, introduce a dangled piece of disinformation regarding a fictional scientist, Dr. Robert Ellison?
Yes, Vance said. His voice was flat. And did Victor Orlov take interest in this information?
Yes. And did he arrange a subsequent meeting to which he brought the defendant, Mikhail Lermontov, for the express purpose of receiving classified information from this fictional scientist? Yes. Lermontov's attorney rose, but his cross-examination was brief.
Dr. Vance, you are a professor of literature, are you not?
I am. You are not an expert in counterintelligence. No, were you aware that Victor Orlov was a KGB agent when you first met him?
No.
It was the FBI who informed you. Yes. And did the FBI subsequently pressure you into cooperating?
Did they suggest your career might be in jeopardy if you refused?
The government prosecutor objected.
The judge sustained the objection. The attorney tried again. Dr. Vance, did you enter into this arrangement?
Willingly?
Vance looked at Reynolds, who was sitting in the back of the room, his face impassive.
He looked at Lermontov, who was watching him with detached curiosity.
I
did what I was told was necessary for the security of my country. The attorney sat down. He had no more questions.
Vance's testimony lasted 30 minutes.
It was the linchpin of the prosecution's case, the fruit of the poison tree doctrine in reverse.
The FBI had created the crime, and Vance was their star witness to its creation.
Lermontov's interrogation, Vance later read in a heavily redacted summary provided by Reynolds, was procedural. The man was a professional. He gave his name, rank, and serial number.
He did not talk. He did not confess.
He simply waited for the system to process him. Faced with Vance's testimony and the overwhelming evidence of the sting, he was found guilty in a trial that lasted less than a day.
He was sentenced to 30 years in a federal penitentiary.
Vance was escorted from the courthouse by Reynolds.
That's it, Doctor, Reynolds said, finally.
For good, this time.
Your testimony is sealed. Your name will not appear in any public record associated with this case.
You're free to return to your life. Reynolds extended a hand.
Vance looked at it, then simply nodded and walked away. He went back to his office, where the books on his shelves filled with stories of human folly, tragedy, and moral compromise seemed to regard him with a new, unwelcome understanding. Returning to his life, as Agent Reynolds had put it, was like trying to reread a book when you already know the ending.
The words are the same, but the magic is gone, replaced by a dull awareness of the artifice.
Dr. Vance continued to teach.
He delivered his lectures on Turgenev, but the superfluous man now felt less like a literary archetype and more like a personal confession. The most immediate consequence was the paranoia. It was a cold, constant companion. He mistrusted his telephone, hearing phantom clicks that were no longer there.
He scanned the faces in his lecture hall, no longer looking for the FBI agent he knew was there, but for the Soviet agent who might be. Had Orlov been the only one? Had his friendship with Orlov marked him in other, unseen files in Moscow?
His relationship with his wife, Eleanor, suffered the most profound, if quietist, damage.
He could not tell her.
To speak of it would be to violate the terms of his cooperation, to endanger himself and her. His secrecy, however, built a wall between them.
He was distant, irritable, and prone to long, brooding silences in his study.
"Arthur, what is wrong?" she asked him night after night.
"You haven't been yourself since."
"Since that dreadful reception. It's just the department." He would lie. "Budget committees. The university. It's not what it was." He was lying to protect her, but the lie itself was the poison.
He had become a man with a secret, and it isolated him.
He drank more than he used to. A second glass of sherry before dinner, then a third.
He found himself avoiding his colleagues.
What if they too were useful?
What if the friendly history professor, or the affable dean, was also filing reports with someone like Peters? The academic community, which he had cherished for its open discourse, now seemed like a forest of shadows.
He had used the trust inherent in that community as a weapon.
He had turned a literary discussion into an ambush.
This self-knowledge was corrosive. The FBI kept its word. His name was never mentioned. The capture of Mikhail Lermontov was celebrated in the newspapers as a triumph of federal vigilance. Agent Thompson, the man who had played Dr. Ellison, received a commendation.
Dr. Arthur Vance received silence. He was safe, but he was not free. He had become complicit in a system he fundamentally distrusted.
He had done it to protect his career, his reputation, and, he told himself, his country. But the cost was a deep internal fracture.
He had been turned into a bait, and even after the trap had been sprung, he still felt the hook in his mouth. He once saw Agent Reynolds, months later, across Harvard Square. Their eyes met for a brief second. Reynolds gave him a short, professional nod, a nod of acknowledgement. not of friendship, and then moved on, disappearing into the crowd. Just another man in a dark suit, tending to the invisible fences of the Cold War. Vance, meanwhile, went back to his office, a man securely imprisoned within the life he had fought to protect.
Years bled into decades. The 1950s gave way to the turbulent 1960 seconds, and then to the cynical 1970 seconds.
The Cold War became a permanent, institutionalized fact of life, a geopolitical condition as immutable as the climate. Dr. Arthur Vance grew older.
His hair turned grey, then white. He continued to teach, a respected, if somewhat melancholic, figure in the Slavic department.
Students saw him as a relic of an older, more formal academic generation.
Eleanor passed away in 1972. Her passing, while peaceful, untethered Vance. His home, once a sanctuary, was now just a large, quiet house filled with books and memories, many of them tainted by the secret he had kept.
Then, in 1975, the atmosphere in Washington changed.
In the wake of Watergate, the nation's tolerance for institutional secrecy had evaporated. The Church Committee hearings began in the Senate, pulling back the curtain on decades of overreach by the CIA and the FBI.
Terms like COINTELPRO, unlawful surveillance, and domestic operations entered the public lexicon. It was in this climate that a young, ambitious journalist from a major Washington newspaper, a man making his name on digging up old secrets, stumbled upon the Lermontov case.
The public file was thin, but the journalist noted the sudden persona non grata status of Viktor Orlov just days before Lermontov's arrest. He sensed a connection has set up. He started digging into Orlov's known contacts.
One name, heavily redacted in some files but present in university logs, kept appearing: Dr. Arthur Vance.
The journalist found Vance, now nearing retirement, living alone.
He knocked on the door of the house on the tree-lined street.
"Doctor."
"Vance," the journalist said, introducing himself.
"I'm writing a story about the FBI's counterintelligence programs in the 1950s.
Specifically, I'm looking at the 1956 arrest of a GRU operative named Mikhail Lermontov." Vance's blood ran cold.
It was the first time he had heard the name spoken aloud in nearly 20 years. I'm just a literature professor," Vance said, his hand tight on the doorknob. "I don't know anything about that." "I think you do, sir," the journalist said, not unkindly.
"I know you met with Viktor Orlov."
"I know the FBI was watching him, and I know that you, an academic, were somehow involved in the operation that led to Lermontov's capture. What I want to know is how."
"Were you an informant? Were you coerced?"
"The public has a right to know how these agencies used, and perhaps abused, American citizens." Vance was confronted with the ghost of his compromise. Agent Reynolds was long gone, likely retired or deceased. The threat to his tenure was meaningless now. He had a choice. He could tell the truth. He could unburden himself, expose the methods of the Bureau, and finally reclaim the narrative.
He looked at the young journalist, seeing the hunger for the story in his eyes.
He saw the headlines.
He saw his name, finally, linked to the case.
And he felt overwhelming. Not desire for truth, but a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. "I am a literature professor," Vance repeated, his voice firm.
"I knew Mr. Orlov only as a cultural attach."
"We discussed Dostoevsky. I am afraid you are mistaken. Now, if you'll excuse me, I am preparing for a lecture." He closed the door. He did not deliver a lecture that day.
He sat in his study, the file that Reynolds had shown him existing only in his memory.
The legacy of his choice was not public revelation or vindication. It was silence. It was the continued preservation of the secret, a secret that now served no one but his own sense of shame.
Mikhail Lermontov, he later learned, had been traded back to the Soviet Union in 1978 in an exchange for a captured American pilot.
The entire affair, all the pressure and the compromise, had ultimately been a temporary move on a vast, impersonal chessboard. In the late 1980s, Arthur Vance was fully retired. He lived in a small condominium, having sold the house. His days were spent in the university library, no longer as a professor, but as a reader.
The world had changed in ways he'd never imagined. A new Soviet leader was speaking of glasnost and perestroika.
The foundations of the Cold War, which had seemed so permanent, were visibly cracking.
He read the newspapers every day, watching the unraveling. He read of the rehabilitation of authors and dissidents, men and women who had been silenced by the same system that Viktor Orlov had served. His reflection on the events of 1956 was not one of simple regret. It was a complex, ambiguous tangle. He had, he supposed, done his patriotic duty as defined by Agent Reynolds. He had helped remove a hostile operative from American soil. He had protected his family and his career from the apparatus of his own government. But he had also allowed that apparatus to enter the sacred space of academia. He had turned an intellectual discussion into an act of entrapment. He had betrayed the simple, human connection he had felt with all of a man who, whatever his true title, genuinely did appreciate his monograph on Turgenev. He had become an accomplice to a system that valued loyalty over morality.
He often wondered about Mikhail, the man he had seen only twice. He wondered about the years Lermontov had spent in a federal prison, a man captured not by his own mistake, but by a carefully manufactured scenario.
Vance had been the bait, but Lermontov was the one who had been consumed. He felt no pride. He felt no simple guilt.
He felt, instead, the profound weight of his own utility. The FBI had correctly identified him. A man whose principles were strong, but whose fear for his own reputation was stronger.
They had played him perfectly. One evening, watching the television news, he saw images of the Berlin Wall coming down. People were celebrating, using hammers and picks to dismantle the most visible symbol of the conflict that had defined his adult life.
The commentators spoke of the end of history, of a victory for freedom.
Dr. Arthur Vance watched the celebrations, but he felt no sense of triumph. He felt only the quiet, analytical chill of the historian. He knew that the systems of surveillance, the methods of coercion, and the moral ambiguities of power did not belong to one ideology or one era. They were permanent tools.
The Cold War may have been ending, but the machinery that had turned a university professor into bait would, he was profoundly sure, remain. Thank you for joining us for this narrative.
If you appreciate historical stories, support the channel by following for future content.